They say revenge is best served cold, but I disagree. Mine was soaked, slow, and calculated, like water rising under a door, silent until it's too late. My name is Daniel Mercer. I live at the edge of Alder Ridge, a neighborhood dressed in wealth and strangled by rules. Gated entrances, mailboxes polished like silver, and the ever-looming HOA, 3 letters that spelled control, not community. But my home was different. Built by my grandfather long before the first McMansion touched this land, our property sat on the edge of a lake. Not a man-made feature designed for aesthetics or kayak selfies, a real lake, fed by underground springs, hemmed by reeds, dragonflies, and old oak trees. It was part of us. Of me. When Alder Ridge was built around us, they tried to buy us out. Think of the property value, they said. Imagine the upgrade. I didn't want an upgrade. I wanted my lake, my peace, and the quiet nights where the frogs sang like lullabies. So I stayed. And they hated that. Especially Judith Kilman. Judith was the HOA president and the closest thing Alder Ridge had to royalty. Platinum blonde hair that never moved in the wind, tailored suits the color of bruised grapes, and a clipboard that followed her like a weaponized accessory. She ran the neighborhood like a regime, levying fines for overgrown hedges, dictating mailbox colors, and scrutinizing holiday decorations for aesthetic inconsistency. But she couldn't touch me. My property predated the HOA. I wasn't bound to their covenant. I was grandfathered in literally and legally. So they watched from behind their hydrangeas, irritated that I didn't manicure my lawn like a putting green, that I had chickens, that I fished, that I lived free. And that's why they came for my lake. It began on a warm spring morning. The sun had barely crested the trees when I heard the knock, sharp, impatient, like someone trying to break rhythm rather than start conversation. I opened the door to find a man in a gray suit and sunglasses. Behind him, Judith stood with her clipboard and her polite smirk. "Daniel Mercer?" the man asked, flipping open a folder. I nodded, tension already crawling up my spine. "This is an official notice from the Alder Ridge Homeowners Association. Based on a recent hydrological assessment, your lake has been deemed a flood risk to adjacent properties during extreme weather events." My mouth went dry. That's nonsense. This lake's been here for over 100 years. Judith stepped forward. "The assessment shows that the water level has risen steadily. We're acting in the interest of public safety." Public safety? I barked. "What about my rights? This is private property." She didn't flinch. "We've consulted with a civil engineer. We're invoking emergency action. You'll receive formal documentation today, but the equipment arrives tomorrow." Equipment. Pumps. Excavators. "We'll be draining the lake, Mr. Mercer. It's non-negotiable." For a long moment, I just stared. Past them. Past the manicured lawns and Range Rovers. Toward the lake that shimmered like liquid memory behind my home. "You have no authority," I said finally. "This isn't your land." The man in the suit handed me a letter, crisp and stamped. "It is now," Judith said. "You'll want to move any personal items near the shoreline." They left without another word, their heels clicking like gunshots on my porch. I spent that night on the dock, barefoot, the old wood warm beneath me. The lake was calm, a sheet of dust-colored glass reflecting the rising moon. Somewhere out in the dark, a heron cried, a sharp, lonely sound. I didn't sleep. The next morning, the pumps came. They rumbled and hissed and groaned, drinking my lake one monstrous gulp at a time. Workers in hard hats moved across the property like they owned it, coiling hoses and driving stakes. I yelled. I threatened lawsuits. I stood in front of the machines. Judith returned with a police officer. "You're obstructing an authorized civil process," she said flatly. "It's theft," I snarled. "You don't get to just erase nature because it's inconvenient." The officer didn't look me in the eye. "Sir, you need to step back." And so I did. I stepped back. Watched. Waited. For 2 days, the water fled. Trees wilted. Fish floundered and died in shrinking puddles. The air reeked of rot and churned mud. By the end, what remained wasn't a lake. It was a scar. They rolled up the hoses and left. Judith returned once more, holding a small envelope. "This is your official notice of compliance," she said.
I didn't take it.
She placed it on the porch rail. "You're required to maintain the now-drained basin in accordance with HOA landscaping standards," she added. "Get off my property." She turned to go. "We'll be in touch." For days, I walked the cracked mud like a ghost. The birds stopped coming. The frogs silent. It was as if something ancient had been stolen, not just water, but the soul of the land. And that's when I saw it. Buried at the bottom of the HOA's website, under upcoming community enhancements, was a new bullet point. Recreational space expansion in southern section pending dry land assessment. Southern section. My lake. They hadn't drained it to prevent floods. They were going to turn it into pickleball courts. I laughed, sharp, bitter, joyless. Of course. That's what it was all about. Property value. Amenity maps. Appearances. My sanctuary, reduced to marketing collateral for their artificial paradise. They thought the lake was theirs to erase. They thought I'd go quietly. But the thing about water is it always finds a way back. And so would I. Vengeance didn't arrive with fire. It came with paperwork, silence, and rain. I didn't scream. I didn't protest. After the pumps vanished and Judith Kilman disappeared behind her wrought iron gates, I buried my rage where they couldn't see it, behind a tired nod and a blank stare. But every step they took to erase my lake just planted the seeds of something darker in me. At first, I focused on facts. HOA documents were public record, if you knew where to look. So I looked. I submitted formal requests under the state's Open Records Act, citing my right as a resident impacted by HOA decisions. They didn't like that. Judith especially. She sent me a notice. "Mr. Mercer, the HOA reminds you that while your property is technically adjacent to Alder Ridge, its grandfathered status does not entitle you to demand sensitive planning documents or internal discussions not expressly relevant to your parcel." I sent back one line. "Then stop making decisions that affect my land." But they couldn't. Because Judith wasn't trying to manage a neighborhood. She was trying to build an empire. As I combed through the documents they did give me, I found it. A proposal, buried in the minutes from an early spring meeting, casually referred to as Phase 3, South Greenway Integration. The language was vague, but not subtle. They wanted to rezone my former lakebed, my property, into a community-accessible recreational corridor. It included diagrams, renderings, a walking path that cut through what used to be cattails and lily pads, pickleball courts, decorative lighting. They were banking on me surrendering, on me selling. Judith's plan was as elegant as it was vile. Make my land uninhabitable and then dress it up for resale. She was counting on me breaking. She had no idea what she'd unleashed. My first move was Natalie. Natalie Sharp wasn't just a friend. She was a geotechnical engineer with a sharp tongue and a sharper mind. We'd gone to school together, and she'd been in the trenches of land disputes and construction litigation for years. I asked her to come by under the pretense of helping me evaluate flood potential. "What you're really asking," she said, kneeling to inspect the dried lakebed, "is if you can weaponize drainage." "I want to know what they undid by draining this," I said carefully. "And what happens when that water doesn't have a place to go anymore?" She straightened, brushing dirt from her jeans. "You want to know how bad it'll get when it rains. And who'll get wet?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She walked the full perimeter with me, took notes, measurements, photos. At the end of the day, she nodded. This basin wasn't just pretty. It was functional. It was a natural retention area. Without it, water's got nowhere to slow down, which means it accelerates downslope. I pointed, right toward Alder Ridge. She grinned, catching on. "You're not trying to fight the HOA."
No.
"You're trying to remind them what they tampered with."
Exactly.
Over the next few weeks, I turned my property into a system. Beneath the guise of landscaping repair, I rented equipment and installed a network of drainage tiles and buried pipes, some legal, some creative. On the surface, it looked like I was finally giving in to Judith's demands to maintain the dry lake bed. Underneath, I was preparing a trap. I redirected natural runoff from my surrounding woods into a hidden reservoir, tanks buried beneath what used to be my dock. I mapped the slope of Alder Ridge, particularly the lower homes. Judith's among them. Her estate sat like a throne at the basin of the hill, shielded by hedges, but exposed beneath. It was a house that had once looked down on everything. Now it was in the perfect position to be swallowed. During the next HOA meeting, held in the community clubhouse with chandeliers and catered finger foods, I attended as a courtesy guest. They tried to act like I wasn't there. But when Judith took the podium, I made sure to sit front and center. "We've made great strides in improving the southern edge of the community," she announced, with a glance in my direction. "We anticipate early movement on the Greenway project once land acquisition details are resolved." She meant me. After the meeting, as residents milled about sipping lemon water, she approached. "You've been quiet," she said. I expected more resistance. "I'm not resisting," I said with a smile. "I'm observing." She narrowed her eyes. "I hope that means you're ready to move forward amicably." I took a slow sip of water and leaned in. "Judith, the thing about draining a lake is, water doesn't disappear. It just finds a new place to go." Before she could speak, I walked away. I wanted that image to linger in her mind. And it did. Then came the rain. Not a hurricane. Not a disaster. Just one of those relentless spring storms that lingers overnight, dumping 2 inches of water over the hills and rooftops of Alder Ridge. By morning, the first complaints had already started appearing on Nextdoor and in the HOA group chat logs, which I monitored through a friendly source. Basement flooded. Dehumidifier can't keep up. Anyone else notice standing water near the tennis courts? My lawn is a swamp. This never used to happen. Judith sent out a bulletin. Rest assured, the HOA is working with contracted landscapers to evaluate the drainage issue. Please do not panic. But panic came anyway. The next rainstorm pushed it over the edge. This time, it was more than puddles. It was driveway streams. It was garages full of brown water. One homeowner had their pool overflow, another had sewage backup. Judith sent emails, called emergency meetings, blamed city infrastructure. But nothing could hide the truth. By removing my lake, she had removed the land's ability to breathe. And I had carefully ensured that the pressure would come knocking on her door first. Natalie ran soil tests for me, then published a neutral article under a pseudonym, which I distributed anonymously across the neighborhood. It detailed how pre-existing natural basins prevented erosion, how improper drainage could trigger foundation shifts. It was technical, factual, and damning. Residents were furious, and they started connecting the dots. At the third emergency HOA meeting that month, chaos erupted. I didn't attend this one, but I watched the footage later, courtesy of a resident live streaming it out of spite. "You drained a lake without city permits," one man shouted. "There was no flood risk. My home's never flooded in 20 years. Are you even qualified to make these decisions?" Judith stood at the front, defensively gripping her clipboard like a crucifix. "We were advised by a civil engineer." "Your nephew," someone interrupted. "He's a college intern." Voices rose. Accusations flew. I saw her flinch, finally realizing she'd lost control. Her empire was crumbling. And I wasn't finished. As summer approached, I walked the dried lakebed one last time. Weeds had grown in wild tangles. The ground was cracked in spiderwebs. But below, the system I'd built was alive and waiting. I hadn't released it yet, but I would. One more storm, and I'd open the tanks, time it perfectly, let the land do what it wanted all along. Judith thought she could rewrite nature with bylaws and blueprints. But she'd forgotten. Nature doesn't forget. And it doesn't forgive. It started with the wind. Branches swayed like dancers on the verge of collapse. Leaves spiraled in warning. You could feel it in your ribs, that charged tension before the sky opens, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The forecast said moderate thunderstorms. But I'd been watching the radar like a hawk, and I knew the truth. This wasn't going to be a drizzle. It was going to be biblical. I stood on the edge of the dead lake bed, the cracked earth stretching wide beneath a canvas of gathering black. Overhead, thunder muttered like a god clearing its throat. Behind me, the system I'd spent months installing sat ready. Hidden reservoir tanks, custom-built trenching, and a bypass valve I could control with a single wrench twist. Natalie had helped me design it all, what she jokingly called liquid karma. This wasn't about flooding the entire neighborhood.
No.
That would make me the villain. I had one target, one address. 37 Hollow Bend Drive, Judith Kilman's estate. At 5:41 p.m., the first drops fell, fat, cold, and heavy. A minute later, they turned into sheets. Water pounded the ground like war drums. By 6 o'clock, the gutters of Alder Ridge were overflowing. The decorative retention basins, those shallow garden trenches the HOA had installed after the first complaints, were already swamped. Water pooled on sidewalks, flooded flower beds, crept along backyard fences. But my land held. The modified drainage system channeled runoff toward the buried tanks. The soil, undisturbed by artificial landscaping, absorbed what it could like a thirsty sponge. And at 6:27 p.m., when the clouds cracked open like splitting bone and wind howled through the trees, I made my move. I went to the valve near the edge of the former dock and twisted it counterclockwise. Click.
Hiss.
The release was slow at first. A whisper. Then it surged. Water flowed through my system, redirected beneath the topsoil and funneled toward Alder Ridge's lowest elevation, the shallow depression where Judith's mansion sat like a monument to ego. The flow wasn't violent. It was patient, relentless. I didn't need to break her walls. I just needed to tilt the land's memory back to what it once was. Nature would do the rest. By 7:10 p.m., Hollow Bend Drive was no longer a street. It was a channel. The manholes burped, then disappeared beneath rising currents. I saw the first video on the neighborhood Facebook page. A Range Rover halfway underwater, hazard lights blinking like a distress beacon. Then came the photos. My basement's flooded. Again. Carpet ruined. Some pump failure. Water 2 inches from the fuse box. We need to call the county. This is getting dangerous. But none matched the masterpiece. At 7:43 p.m., a resident named Elise Langford uploaded a video captioned, "Judith's house is a lagoon." It had everything: chaotic panning, breathless commentary, and a shot of Judith Kilman, knee-deep in muddy water, standing in her marble-tiled foyer in complete disbelief. Her koi pond had overflowed. Her garage door had buckled. Water lapped at the legs of her grand piano. Her kingdom was drowning. I watched from my porch, sipping tea like it was wine. And then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "What did you do?" Her voice was unrecognizable, hoarse, high, wild. "Evening, Judith," I said evenly. "Something wrong?" "You smug," she bit off the word. "My house is flooded. The street is underwater."
You did something.
"I know it." I let silence stretch. "Water has memory," I said finally. "You took its home. It found a new one. You're insane. I'll have you arrested. You're going to pay for this." "Like I paid for the pumps that drain my lake?" I asked, quiet but clear. "Like I paid for the damage to my land? The fish? The trees? The history you wiped clean so you could install pickleball courts?" "None of that was personal," she shrieked. I leaned back. "It is now." She hung up. By the next morning, local news vans lined the edge of Alder Ridge. Footage of flooded luxury homes ran on the early broadcasts under headlines like, "Million-dollar neighborhood swamped after sudden downpour," "Faulty drainage or poor planning." Alder Ridge residents demand answers. Judith gave an interview, visibly shaken, dressed in a plastic poncho that clashed violently with her usual designer attire. "We're calling for a full investigation. We believe the stormwater management system failed due to external tampering." She never said my name, but everyone knew. The narrative was shifting. The HOA imploded within days. Half the board resigned. Homeowners formed a new committee, one focused on transparency and environmental impact. I received no fewer than 8 apology letters in my mailbox, each handwritten, each groveling. Judith vanished from public view. Then, 3 weeks later, a county inspector knocked on my door. Mr. Mercer?
Yeah.
We received an anonymous report alleging you modified your land to redirect stormwater toward adjacent properties. Mind if we take a look? I led him around, showed him the landscaping, the drainage tiles, the overflow trenches. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive. Natalie had made sure it all passed code. The inspector scratched his chin. Looks like natural runoff behavior to me. Good job keeping your soil uncompacted. Most folks just slab everything in concrete. I smiled. Nature's smarter than us, usually.
He left.
No citation. No fine. That night, I sat on the former dock, the air humid, the crickets loud. The lake was gone. But in its place, something deeper had formed, not water, but memory. Proof that you can't suffocate land without consequence. That every action comes back around, whether through flood or fire. And I was still here. Not because I fought dirty, but because I let nature fight for me. I'd made my point, but this wasn't over. The land wasn't done speaking. The story should have ended with the flood. That's what everyone expected, that after Judith's downfall and the HOA's collapse, I'd fade back into the trees like some mythic bog creature. The villain turned victor. A whisper among property records. But victory isn't a moment. It's a choice you have to keep making. And peace doesn't return on its own. You have to earn it. 2 months passed. The summer heat settled in thick as oil. Alder Ridge sat scarred, lawns still soggy, driveways stained from sediment, luxury homes nursing water damage beneath cheap siding. Insurance agents came and went like buzzards. Some families left altogether. The HOA was under internal audit. The term class action had started floating around like pollen. And Judith? Judith disappeared. Not literally. Her house still stood, abandoned, eerily quiet, a for sale sign staked into the ground like a white flag. Rumor had it she'd moved back to the East Coast, into some smaller condo near her sister. She didn't even contest her expulsion from the HOA board. Just left. It felt hollow. Too clean. But nature has its own justice. I'd learned that. And I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. One afternoon, while walking the southern edge of my property, where cattails had started to regrow without permission, I saw a boy skipping rocks on what remained of the marshy basin. He couldn't have been more than 10. Barefoot. Dirt smudged. A backpack sagging over one shoulder. You live in a ridge? I asked, keeping my voice gentle. He nodded without looking up. We're in the yellow house. Mom says we might move. She hates the mud. I chuckled. Used to be a lake here, you know. Big one. Deep in the middle. People fished off this very bank. He skipped another rock. Why'd they get rid of it? I didn't answer immediately. I knelt beside him instead, picked up a flat stone, and tossed it. It skimmed the water twice before sinking. Some folks thought it was dangerous, I said. They thought they could make it safer by taking it away. He frowned. Did it work? Nope. After that, I started letting the water return. Not through scheming. Not through sabotage. Just patience. I removed the drainage valves.
Stopped mowing.
Pulled up the fake turf they'd installed during the restoration phase. I planted native grasses. I invited frogs back. And with each rainfall, the basin filled a little more. Not deep. Not like before. But alive. And slowly, the land began to breathe again. The new HOA committee visited one day in early September. 3 members. 2 I didn't recognize and 1 I did. Elise Langford, the woman who filmed Judith's flooded foyer. She approached me at the dock's edge with cautious respect. Mr. Mercer, she said, we want to extend an apology. A real one. You're not the first, I replied. I know. But we're the first with authority to make it right. She offered a folder. Inside, a proposal. Not a greenway. Not a park. A protected wetland easement. A permanent, legally recognized zone across my land that would preserve the lake's footprint, give it room to rise and fall naturally, and prohibit further development forever. In exchange, they asked for nothing. Just permission. I looked out at the water. Reflected in its surface were clouds.
Sky.
The possibility of healing. Make it a sanctuary, I said. Not just land. Memory. She nodded. We will. Months passed. Judith's house sold at a loss. The HOA bylaws were rewritten. My lake, though smaller, was designated as a community wetland, open to students and scientists. Children came in boots to catch tadpoles. Artists came to sketch. No one built tennis courts. No one drained anything. People remembered what the land had been, and what it was always meant to be. And as for me, I stayed. Not out of spite, not out of stubbornness, but because I'd learned that even after everything, the loss, the fight, the flood, the real power wasn't in vengeance. It was in returning, letting the water come back, letting the land speak again, and finally being heard.